104.7 and 1570 AM WVTL.
We welcome Joel Blaeser to the program, author of the book Letters from Marion. Good morning, Joel.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Marion is a prison, southern Illinois. You were a prisoner, and things are better now, I gather.
Bob, yes, things are much better. Could you imagine being locked up in a tiny cell 22 hours a day for 23 months straight? It was quite the experience. Served a total of 61 months in federal prison on narcotics charges. I used to travel the world with the Grateful Dead selling LSD.
Really? Those were your narcotics charges, selling Grateful Dead, or on a Grateful Dead tour selling LSD?
Yes.
Why were you in this? It sounds like you were in solitary confinement. Why was that?
Well, that's a good question. The entire prison of Marion is solitary confinement. There were a number of riots in October of 1995, drug law riots over the crack law. It's a bit of a story. I'll keep it short and succinct. And as a result of those riots, 21 in Talladega, Alabama, as a result of that riot, it sparked 13 other prisons to simultaneously riot, and I was sent to Marion on the surface because of those riots. There was a much bigger, sinister story with a lieutenant at that prison in Talladega, which I chronicle in the book Letters from Marion, and that's truly the reason why I was sent to Marion. But on the surface, I was charged with actually being the one who organized and instigated the entire crack law riot, and was sent to Marion under the assumption that I was the one who actually organized those riots, which was false.
Okay, so you were not the person who organized the riot.
I was not, and when you're in prison and you get charged with starting a riot, it's at least as a serious offense as murder, because you not only put the guards in danger, but the people in the free world. And Marion is sort of the last stop. It was opened after Alcatraz closed in 1963 and was designed for the worst of the worst. Absolutely just an amazingly, incredibly horrible place. I mean, you could stab a prison guard and not get sent there. There was, as a first-time nonviolent deadhead to wind up in Marion with John Gotti and Bruce Pierce and Doc Holliday and many other nefarious groups and people was just really, you'd almost have better luck winning the lottery. You could, if you tried to get to Marion, it'd be hard to get sent there. So that was, but at the end of the day, I think it was one of my greatest gifts in life.
Really? And you were, and I'm sorry, let me ask you this, is Marion still in operation, that prison?
Marion is in operation. In 2000, it opened in 62. In 1983, there were two brutal murders by Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fontaine, and that actually, it was a level 5.5 at that point, and then they made it a level 6 and locked the entire prison down. And then in 2007 or 8, they decommissioned it as a supermax federal prison and turned it into a medium security prison, which still by right, a medium security prison, there's murders and stabbings and, lots of people have life sentences. And then the ADX in Florence sort of took its place. Now, the ADX in Florence was open since, I think, 95. So at that time, in 95, there were two level 6s, but Marion was sort of phased out to a medium, and the ADX in Florence sort of took Marion's place. But Marion was known as the Marion model, and all supermaxes that have been built prior, well, not prior, but since then, they sort of used Marion as the model, the states and the feds, because it just seemed to work for containing the worst prisoners.
Now, so this is the story that you were sentenced, you went to Marion prison, eventually, I mean, you were in another prison, you served your time and you got out? Is that what happened at Marion?
Yes, but actually, I was originally sentenced to 151 months. It was an 18-count federal indictment for interstate commerce of LSD, and then the way that if you send money through the Western Union, that's actually considered a form of money laundering. It's not the one that most people think where you're hiding money, buying cars, and saying that your business had it. And I was 12 years, 7 months is what that equates to for the listeners, and you have to serve 85% of that, which is about 11 years. And I had filed 4 appeals. One went to the Supreme Court, and I lost. And then the 4th appeal I filed, I was actually released from court that day, which is it was about my 1867th day. I was released, which was 5 years and 1 month. And so I was released from court. Had I not won that appeal, I won one before and I got 30 months off, I would have been released around 2002. And I think if I had lost that appeal, there was really very little avenue for me to get out. I went to trial. I didn't testify against anyone. I didn't turn any sort of state's evidence, and there was really no other vehicles back into court. I had one last final shot, but that could have taken 5 or 6 years, which wouldn't have mattered anyway because my sentence would have been up. So, yes, in a sense, I didn't actually walk out of Marion free. I walked out of the courtroom free.
And that was, I understand here, 15 years ago. And are you sober?
Yes, I am sober. That's a great question. I am 9 years sober. December 29th, 2003 is my sobriety date. So actually, I'm almost 9 years sober. And it took me, when I got out, I wasn't depressed and downtrodden, and I struggled and I worked and I had a business. I was a very high-functioning alcoholic, and in the sense of the monetary. Mm-hmm. I got a job, I started a business, and I became very successful in that realm, but I just seemed to have some resentments and demons that I had not dealt with that went all the way back to early childhood. But I had cultivated enough of a spiritual roadmap in Marion, which truly I still use to this day, that I was able to see that and that I needed help, and I joined a anonymous 12-step program, which saved my life and is saving my life, and I employ that as well into my roadmap of living. Mm-hmm. And so I am sober. It's a great thing.
Joel Blaeser's book, Letters from Marion. Let me ask you about it's more than our question of the day, which was simply whether marijuana possession should be legalized. I believe you take a stand that legalizing drugs, plural in general, would be good, or would reduce addiction, save the economy, and make room in prison for violent offenders.
I do, Bob. And let me, if somebody came to you and could present hard evidence that, in fact, drugs would reduce the number of addicts, that you would create jobs, that you would take the criminal element out of the drug dealing, which would then make room in prison for more violent offenders, for the non-consensual crimes, the rapes and the murders and the robberies, as opposed to a consensual crime. I sell something to somebody that they want to buy. To point to a recent country that did it, Portugal did just that. And the Cato Institute did a study on it. I wrote an article for the New York Times. I still haven't published it yet. And the Cato, which quotes this very statistic, the Cato Institute did a study 2 years after, which was, I believe it was 2007 that the study came out, and they showed that for heroin, cocaine, and marijuana, and methamphetamine, that the number of addicts went down, the number of people that were the number of addicts went down, and the number of sales went down, obviously, because you could do it in this sort of controlled environment. And by registering these addicts, eventually, a lot of them were led to recovery, so they stopped. The government then would tax this sale. It created more jobs. It increased public awareness. It increased public safety, because now this wasn't underground and, people using dirty needles and having to sell their body. I mean, it was a win-win-win for everybody. And in today's state of our economy, the numbers is in the billions. I mean, the fact that drugs are illegal doesn't stop people from using them, but it does create a dangerous situation, and it's something that I believe is not safe for our country, and it just seems to be politically, a lot of candidates are afraid to bring it up because they don't want the other candidate to use it against them. And I hope our president-elect right now, Obama, since it is a second term and he doesn't have to worry about getting reelected, that he can confront some of these, because Colorado and Maryland, as you know, Bob, just legalized marijuana for small amounts.
Now, and that seems to be the way people that support more legalization of drugs are approaching it kind of piecemeal, again, beginning with marijuana, because perhaps people aren't as afraid of marijuana these days as they are of, quote unquote, other drugs. Like you mentioned, methamphetamine. I mean, this is a pretty rural area. We have, methamphetamine abuse up here, and it seems just awful.
It is. Methamphetamine is one of those drugs that I have actually, because people will ask me, well, do you really think methamphetamine should be illegal? Well, I think, and I hate to use this term, and I use it very sparingly in life, but the lesser of two evils. Now, where would you rather have the methamphetamine being administered? Because this is the thing. Making it illegal is not going to stop people from doing it. But if you make it legal, you pull the wool right out from under the criminals, and you sort of bring it out into the open, and then you have these addicts coming to get the stuff, and then you're able to treat them and say, hey, look, there's a better way. Now, I think with marijuana, it's a different story. It is a drug. It is a heavy drug, but I believe that used recreationally and more of not of an abusive way, that is way lesser than, say, cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine. Yeah. Now, I don't use any drugs because I can't. I mean, one is too many and 20 is not enough. That's my situation. But generally speaking, I think there are people who can recreationally use cocaine and marijuana. Now, cocaine, that's a whole other thing. But methamphetamine, you're right. But what is the lesser of two evils? To keep it illegal? Because it hasn't... Nixon, 40 years ago, declared the war on drugs, but it hasn't worked.
But it's such an established fact, the war on drugs. I mean, it really kind of directs a great deal of what law enforcement does in this country. I think that I'm just saying, I think it's a problem to change it. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. And if it's not going to happen overnight, maybe it won't happen. In other words, I think people just sort of throw up their hands at it. How are we going to change this whole big system?
Well, you're right. It is. It's daunting. And the reason I wrote this book, the instigation and the inspiration were the drug law riots, but ultimately, and it doesn't say this anywhere in my book, but it's to bring a national debate about drug law reform and prison reform. Letters from Marion it chronicles my story, but when people read it and they see that this is what's really happening, I think that it will bring it to light. But you're right. But here's the thing. Colorado is saying, they're sort of saying, okay, the state of Colorado is saying, we believe this. Maryland is saying, we believe this. California has it for medicinal purposes. At a certain point, and it will be within Obama's terms, his this 4-year term, more states are going to legalize marijuana, and the issue is getting brought to light. And other countries have legalized drugs. Mexico has a couple of the states in Mexico. England has a system where if you were an addict and you register, that you can get help with, getting the drugs. Portugal legalized drugs, so that, and everybody follows our lead. And at the end of the day, for some, I think we got to let it be greed. Let's create the jobs. Let's profit off of it. Because here's the thing: if you take all those people out of prison, yes, that's an industry. The DEA, yes, that's an industry. It's jobs. They feel threatened. But I think that so many other jobs will get created that somehow they're going to have to transition. But two wrongs don't make a right. I mean, slavery was legal in this country and other countries for thousands of years. That didn't make it right. So the fact of the matter is, just because it's established doesn't mean it's right. I mean, as an informed citizen, we need to confront this and bring it to light. And it's being brought to light because these laws are slowly changing. And the worst drug of all is alcohol, and it's been legal. Well, I mean, that was even illegal in the Prohibition days. Joel
Blaeser's book is Letters from Marion. He has been out of jail for 15 years. And one thing we didn't discuss, but you also discussed in the book, something completely different. You're in the real estate business. So you have advice. I mean, I don't know if you have it in this book, but you have advice on selling real estate or making money with real estate.
I do. Don't get over leveraged. I hit a big, huge bump in the road in 2009. My sole source of income for the last 12 years, from 1999 to 2011 was real estate. Then I took a little hiatus. I filed bankruptcy. I lost everything. In '09, I actually lost it. I waited 2 years to file bankruptcy. I got way over leveraged. And I had a $911,000 in debt and tied to 3 pieces of real estate that were foreclosed upon. But, my biggest year was 2006. I actually made $1,010,000 of take-home money that I paid taxes on to the IRS. And I would say don't get over leveraged and just do step by step. We don't have much time to talk here, but, the real estate for dummies are, don't get over leveraged. You got to buy it right. You make your money on the buy, and But there's so many different forms of real estate. I did farms, industrial, triple net leasing, commercial, residential, restoration, mixed-use buildings, vacant land. There's just, starker exchanges. Sometimes the land is dirty. But the basics, my grandmother would say, if you can't afford to pay cash for it, you don't deserve it. And my first house, I bought a United States Marshal drug seizure auction, of all places, with cash. And then as I started to grow, I started to use banks. And banks aren't all bad, but at the end of the day, if you own it with cash, you own it. And today it's a very funny situation because there's so much supply and the velocity of sales are down. So rentals are good because you have a lot of residential rentals are good because you have a lot of people who make high incomes but don't have good credit because of the crash. And so they're renting. So your pool of renters is much larger. Okay. And then... So,
I'm sorry, Joel. I got to go. Thanks very much for joining us. Joel Blaeser, his book, Letters from Marion. You can find out about it online. He also, I presume, has a website by that name, lettersfrommarion.com.
Yes.
Thank you, Joel. Have a good day.
Thank you, Bob.
Bye-bye. 9:52.